Hello, my name is Dan Johnson and welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to be ranking the most recent 8th Doctor saga. The idea behind that 16 episode series was that the Doctor and his companions Liv and Helen have lost the TARDIS. It has landed them in London 2020 and they are now stranded. It no longer works. They cannot go forwards or backwards or go to any different planets. They are stuck there. And the series kind of domesticates Doctor Who and means that he is stuck there having to live out his life the way that normal people do and occasionally fight alien monsters. The series is more of a character piece focusing on the huge ensemble of people that they have living in the building with them. And then as the series goes on, time travel gets involved, and with time about to end, what is the Doctor going to do now? And before we begin the tier list, I think it's worth pointing out that I am now in a different section of my room. Behind me you can see my Big Finish collection. There's a couple of vinyls at the top, and I thought it'd be interesting to try and do a video here. The only issue is there's a giant light above my head, which means that I've got bags on my eyes, but let's be honest, I had them before. And then in terms of categories, we have 4. We have not great, fine, really enjoyable, and the top tier, which is of course McGann worship. And so if we start at the bottom, the only episode I felt didn't quite work was the final episode of the 3rd series, which was entitled What Just Happened. Took me a second, but I got there. This story left me unfulfilled because even though they tried to do something different with the whole backward story idea and showing you the events of the episode but in reverse order, I admire them for doing that, but I think that it just didn't quite work and came across as more of a gimmick just to tell a simple story. But then as the episode goes on, you're developing this hindsight and you're going along sort of working out, actually this is where this went wrong, this is how that happened, but you're sort of just filling in the details less than enjoying the story, and I just don't find it very engaging when it's just so simple. And all of the cool stuff that would have made a really interesting finale to this box set just happens in like the first 20 minutes, and then the rest of it is just playing catch up. And then we move up to our fine category, and in that category the first story I've placed there is the first episode of box set 3. Box set 3. Patience is a very interesting story because it sort of takes the dynamics that you're used to seeing within this huge ensemble cast and switches them around a little bit. It gives the TARDIS team time to talk to each other that they normally wouldn't do. You know, you have Liv and Helen and Tanya, but in this story Helen and Andy are brought together and Liv and Tanya, so it makes a very interesting dynamic to see how they interact with each other. There's an interesting story going on, but a lot of it is quite character focused and focusing more on their conversations. There's an interesting undercurrent to the story which I think sort of drives it along and makes it, you know, interesting, but I think that it doesn't really deserve much more praise than good interactions and some Jadoon, which I suppose is quite cool. Our next placement is in box set 2, and it's the first story of that set. I think, personally for me, the huge ensemble team doesn't normally work, but in this saga, it does. And this story is where things properly come into fruition with the idea. I loved how the writers were able to juggle all of these people and give them more interesting things, so they discover this brand new wasteland after the first series leaves them completely stranded. In this one they can travel backwards and forwards, but they can't leave Earth. There's some interesting interactions, there's some fun scenes, some beautiful foreshadowing and overarching plot stuff, but I don't think it really stands by itself. And the final one in this category is the very first episode of this set, and that is called Lost Property. When I sat down to listen to Stranded, I knew that we were going to get some simple stories, or maybe more character-based stories, and less of the action-packed adventures that we were getting previously with the 8th Doctor. And Lost Property surprised me in the fact that the writing was so good that it straight away sort of lifted the characters, lifted the writing, the acting, all of it came up, and I just thought, okay, I'm really into this world now, I really want to see what's going to happen here. There's some interesting words of warning, everyone gets introduced, there's a fun little dynamic there and some things to explore in the future. But standalone, it doesn't really have that factor that makes you think, oh, I'm going to listen to that one. And so we come up to another category, and the first one, or the first 4 I've put up here, is the entirety of the 4th box set. I feel like these are so connected, so together in their consistency, that I just feel like they have to be all in one bulk. I think that Stranded could have easily had this sort of escalating adventure where it became this, ravenous, extravagant event with time travel stuff. And I suppose in some respects it did, but I do love the way that they treated this box set and gave the story an ending that fitted its tone. I think that you have that adventure, you have that action, but then at the same time, the last episode particularly is almost like a prologue. It sort of wraps up the character interactions in the same way that the first one introduced them. So I think that that was beautiful. The issue that I have with this box set is that I feel like the stories are quite samey, which is why I've kind of put them together. They're all talking about time travel, but then the final episode I think does kind of boost it up, the third episode as well, and they introduce some lovely ideas that have been running throughout this entire series, but I think their payoff to them is really good here. I think this next story is the closest that we get to this big adventure, and that story is Twisted Folklore. I do like how the story deals with propaganda, fake news, and sort of how if you're fed into a machine that just pumps the same view to you, how that fear, that propaganda just tricks your mind constantly. The story's quite interesting, has some nice moments, so pretty solid stuff. Our next story is the final episode of the first box set. The domesticated ideas that have been shown to us within Stranded, connecting with the whole space and, something along the lines of Ravenous, the aliens, I suppose. There's also a lovely bit of sort of foreshadowing and sort of the planning of the sets that I really love, which relates to the story I've just talked about, Twisted Folklore. The episode is able to mash the ideas of aliens and these people that are coming to kill the Doctor for something he has or will do against this domestic drama that Stranded's all about. And I think that the two of them colliding works really well. The idea that Liv is trying to go on a date with Tanya and then it becomes a building meal and then the table gets invaded by aliens, I think is quite cool and very Doctor Who. So for that, I think that it just fits my personal taste very well. So that's why it's quite high. Our next story is entitled Must See TV. I like this story because it has a sense of mystery. There is a suspenseful atmosphere because who is watching them? Why are they watching them? And even though I don't feel like it quite works out with, perfect closure during this episode, there's a lot of elements that are established later on that kind of make this episode work better for me, because I originally thought it was good but didn't like the ending, and then as the sets went on I went, actually I do quite like that one. Now we're into the top tier with my favourite episodes of Stranded, the first one being Wild Animals. When I first listened to this story I thought it's fine, it's a little bit of domestic drama once again, but when I looked into its deeper meaning and thought about it a little bit more once I re-listened to it, I actually really loved this episode. It's not really about the domestic drama, but it's focusing more on the Doctor and how he feels about his new situation. The wild animals element is him. The Doctor is caged by the world that he now lives in, and this story explores that brilliantly. It talks about how even in this world where he can fight aliens and all this bonkers stuff, there are still things that he can't control and things that he can't stop from happening and people he can't save. And I think that realization within the story is absolutely brilliant. Next we have The Long Way Round, which is the final episode of the second box set, and for me this story is a gimmick that's done well. This is primarily set in a interrogation where two people are having a conversation and you cut between the TARDIS crew members as they recall events that have just happened. There's one moment with Tanya which I think was always designed to get under her skin and to annoy her, and I think that it's a real poignant moment in the episode. I was at work at the time listening to this one just because it was quiet. I was cleaning and had this on my phone, and when I was listening to it there was a moment of, oh crap, did that actually just happen? Did they actually just go there? Oh, okay, these people mean business. Once again, there's a bit of a mystery, some beautiful interactions, and how each character deals with the interrogation setting I found quite fascinating, as well as some timey-wimey bits as well. I'm quite into my character-based episodes, so my final three are all focusing on someone. The next episode focuses on Ron, and that episode is called Snow. It's the third episode of the third series. I think the third series is quite a weak one. I don't think it has particularly standout moments, but Snow is quite touching. In 10 years' time, an alien has landed, and its bizarre ability is that it snows. but it only snows to those that are mourning or who are experiencing high levels of grief. So all of Baker Street, for example, is empty apart from one house, which is Ron's house, which is snowing over. The episode explores grief, and it's such an interesting concept. I just got completely behind it. What a fascinating story. And talking about fascinating stories, my final two choices are kind of on a level playing field for me. They're both in box set 2. Our first story focuses on Ron and Tony and their 70s unit days with the Brigadier. And there's some interesting time dilation between what's happening in the 70s and what's happening modern day. There's plenty to establish in terms of their relationship. I found the whole story quite interesting, quite fun. The episode sort of picks you up on this concept, which is quite easy to understand, but is very fun and drags you along. And I think that it just worked quite well because of that. And the second story is very similar, so it had to kind of be on par, where you have the sisters, who I've forgotten the name of currently. But those two sisters are the descendants of the Baker Street irregulars, and the story focuses on World War II and a bomb that has landed on Baker Street. They're stories that, as I look back on Stranded, that really stood out to me of being the best. And so we come towards the end. This is what I think of the box sets individually. 2, of course, being my favourite, with the third being the final one. But as I look upon Stranded as one complete saga, I think that it's all been very character focused, and even though it has, its highlights and its lowlights to it, I think that overall it has been a really, really fun ride and a definite needed change of pace for the 8th Doctor. And I look forward to seeing what they're going to do with him in the future, because I think they've got to change the format now to the format that Big Finish normally does with the 3 stories. So with that, I would love to see what they're about to do next with the Doctor and his companions, if not even more companions beyond this. I think that this series as a whole is going to stand out among the 8th Doctor timeline because a lot of their box sets have been quite similar. They've been these big adventures, and this one has been nice and calm. It's focused more on the characters, it's allowed things to develop, and I think that it's been much better because of that. It's such a cool idea, the concept of Stranded, so with that, I just really enjoyed it. So what did you think of Stranded? Are there any episodes that you really disliked? Is there any that you loved? If you want to, you can do your ranking down in the description below. But thank you very much for watching, and I shall see you soon. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Goodbye.